Welcome, brothers and sisters, back to the Church of Doom, your YouTube, Spotify, Apple podcast source of inspiration for all things world building, be it RPGs, miniature war games, or maybe you're writing a book and you just are like, I wish there was a place on the internet where I could go and listen to a guy who is really into weird niche hobbies, ramble about it for a long time, and I can take a bunch of ideas that he has and use them however I want. That would be cool if that existed on the internet. Well, congrats, you found it. This is that place. This is your refuge on the internet for cool fantasy, sci-fi, weird ideas. And today we've got a pretty stacked sermon of interesting ones to share. Now I will begin this sermon by noting, if you are a frequent listener of the channel, it's been a little while. It's been like a few weeks since my last one, or my last hobby sermon, and that's because having a kid takes up more time than, I was going to say than you'd expect, but it's taking up exactly as much time as I would expect. I just expected myself to be able to stay on top of it a little bit better. And at the end of the day, I always imagine at the end of the day, it's like, oh, I'll go down after he's gone to bed. I'll paint for 20 minutes, or I'll craft for 20 minutes, or I'll draft up the Patreon post that needs to go up on Sunday for 20 minutes. And that does not happen as often as I wanted it to because I'm just so tired. But I'm working on it. And I want to be more consistent with this, so I'm happy to be here with you all today. Anyways, that little side thing off or taken care of. Let me tell you what we got going on today. We are going to begin our hobby sermon with hobby updates. I'll share some of the things that I have completed over the past week and I'm presenting today as offerings to the hobby gods, as evidence of my devotion to squeezing as much joy out of my hobbies as I can, and actually doing it, not just talking about it, right? Then we'll get into our main sermon segment. I have been brainstorming ideas for new factions that could exist in the 40K universe. Some of them are like totally brand new and like as in new species, and others are more like, ooh, what's a cool little sub-faction that I would want to run or kit bash a little warband representative of existing factions. Like what's a cool Imperial Guard regiment? What's some lore I would give them? Or what's like a cool, I think I have one for Tau in there, or maybe, I don't know if that one made the cut. Anyway, some of them are brand new. Some of them are more like add-ons to existing factions, but I'm really, really excited to talk through them with you all and hopefully hear some ideas from you guys in the comments, because it was a fun exercise that I'd never really done before, at least through the lens of let's get really weird with it. What could be brand new? And then we will wrap up our sermon with a short little list of ideas I have for where the mortal species came from, or how they came to exist in my homebrew setting of Urchin. Like, where did the elves come from? Where did dwarves, gnomes, all that sort of stuff? Where did they come from? Because I've never really given it a lot of thought. I've sort of just hand-waved it as like, oh, I think Vecna just sort of like took humans and messed with the mortal gene code, and he's kind of like made these other branching off species. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, I don't love it. It's not weird enough. And so I'll share my ideas for where some of them have come from. And you get to have a little insight into my world building as it's being applied to my setting. So with that being said, brothers and sisters, let us pray. Hobby updates. I've got 4 of them to share with you this week. First one being, I've done some painting practice. This is Ivar. Let me get that right over my face so you can see him. Ivar, he is a 3D print from Knucklebones Miniatures that you can go pick up. I call him Ivar the Pretender, because if you look at his like mini, he looks like he's sort of wearing, he's got like that big nobleman's collar. He's got the little things on his wrists that kind of look like the ends of sleeves of some sort of nobleman's coat. But he's clearly like this hideous, kind of bizarre looking guy. His like really dopish looking face is funny. Can I zoom in on that close enough? Can you see his like tiny little eyes and his big funny lips? So my lore for him, and he's holding this like big weird dagger, and he's kind of concealing it. Like when you look at him from the front, you don't really see it. So my idea for his lore is he was part of a nobleman's caravan. He was a servant. Maybe he was even the jester of some kind, and the caravan was ambushed, and he was the only survivor. And he's such a fool. He's such a kind of a frankly an idiot, that he took the coat of the noble he once served and wore it for himself. He put on the coat, he put on the collar and the little things at the end of his sleeves, and now he walks around. He's kind of this like roaming idiot who presents himself and tells people he's a noble. He's taken up the identity of the noble he once served. And anyone who disagrees with him gets a knife in the back, because Ivar, it's not like I don't think he kills people because he's like, oh, I need to keep this secret, and they realize that I'm not a noble. It's like, I think he just gets so mad at people. Like, he's so thoroughly actually believes himself to be a noble now, that anyone who says he isn't, he takes it as this like extreme offense and kills them, because he thinks he can do that now because he's a noble. Like, he saw the noble he served do that to tons of people, so now he's gonna do it. But wow, I think there's a very heavy squeaking sound going on upstairs. Can you guys hear that? Maybe not so. I hope you guys can't hear that. Apologies if you can hear a slight squeaking sound upstairs. I have family upstairs visiting and checking out the little Doomling baby. Anyways, I want to get him a little closer so we can kind of talk about like the painting style, because I've been practicing Blanchitsu painting style, which is like John Blanche was a concept artist for Warhammer 40K way back in the day, and has a really cool color scheme that is mostly like reds, yellows, browns, whites, and blacks. And I've just never been able to quite get something that I feel hit his style until this mini. And what it is, besides using just like a lot of those colors of with the flesh tones and the red and the yellow on his like big cloak, the pops of white on his collar and stuff, what I really feel like made it work is you can tell I've done like a speckling effect. I took a brush, dipped it in white paint, and then with my finger, I did this. So I dipped it in paint, and then I just flicked the bristles like that to get this splattering of white. And what I did first was actually a splattering of like a brown wash, which you might not be able to see very well. You can see it more on the arms than the actual red cloak. But I did brown, and then I did white. And I feel like that really conveys, or it has this, it kind of mirrors the style of painting that Blanche did, where he was canvas. He was painting on either probably not canvas, but he was painting on like a piece of paper. It was a flat surface, and he would get lots of spackling on there to kind of give it this texture and an interesting, I guess it's texture, right? And that's hard. I couldn't quite figure out what I was missing on the mini until I tried that, and then I'm like, whoa, he looks like he's on the canvas. He looks like he's just been painted onto whatever workbook John was on, in his sketchbook or whatever. So I was really, really happy with that. And I didn't put this guy in the blog post because he was from a little while ago. I might have already shown him, but this was another recent one that I did before Ivar the Pretender. I don't really have lore for this guy. He's just like some cool cultist holding a skull. I feel like I did really good with him too. I like the kind of wet blending I did with the Citadel contrast paints on his cloak. I think the face looks really, really cool with the highlights. But you can see that he doesn't have the speckling effect. Instead, he has more like edge highlighting with white on his sleeves, especially like up on the top of his head and stuff. And I like both. Like, Ivar does not have those strong white highlights anywhere really, except kind of on his dagger. Let me see if you can see that. You can just kind of see on his dagger, he has some of those edge white highlights. And I feel like maybe I can combine the two. Maybe I can do a little bit more edge highlighting and adding in the speckle effect. My only worry is it will become too busy, and the speckling will sort of make it hard to see the white edge highlighting if I did more of it. So I'm going to do at least one or two more practice models before I jump into like one of my Kid Bashed kill teams that I showed off in a previous sermon. Like, I want to paint these guys, but I'm not trying to like be perfect at the Blanchitsu style, but I just want to have like a better sense of confidence with it. And so this is one of the guys that I'll paint up and practice, this cool Iron Maiden headed assassin. And then I'm in the process of painting this guy too. So I'm really happy with where it's all going, and I think I'm really close to cracking it, but we're just not quite there yet. So anyways, but that is one of my hobby offerings I present. Ivar the Pretender. Really happy with how he came out. And you can get him from Knucklebones minis and 3D print him, or you can order him as a physical mini too. If you're not a patron of Knucklebone minis, you should be. He's awesome. The next thing I did as an offering, as to practice to my hobby, is I ran session 32 of my weekly Daggerheart campaign, The Wretched Tropics. I've talked about it a lot on my channel, but the quick quick synopsis is the players in this campaign were part of a small pilgrimage that was sent across the Dead Sea to this possibly one of the most remote places on the world of Urchin, and that is the Wretched Tropics, this jungle peninsula filled with sulfuric gases and bogs and rivers and all of that. It's just like a tropic that is like rotting in and on itself. It's just constantly rotting and dying, but it's a jungle, so it grows up so fast that it somehow manages to stay around. And all of that is because of the ancient black dragon known as Facepocker, who is living inside this volcano at the center of the tropics. And the martyrs have come here as part of this pilgrimage to resettle the tropics. At one point, there was a fabled city called Featherwharf that was here, and the church and Vecna and the Inquisition, they want to find it, but they've not succeeded so far. And so they've decided we just need to resettle a proper settlement here from where we can send out research teams, and maybe we'll eventually find it. And so that's what the martyrs are doing. They're part of this group that is settling a small little village and going out and exploring the tropics and trying to find Featherwharf. It's been really fun. But so far in the campaign, we've been spending a lot more time kind of focused on the characters' like personal narratives right now, and haven't really quite gotten to a point where we can dive into Facepocker and the search for Featherwharf. But I did want to just quickly show you kind of what happened in the previous session real quick. So let me Google view. There we go. So in our session, it's kind of embarrassing what I'm about to show you, because really the players basically went from here to here on the map. And it is like a very big map. This is the Violet Jungle, and that's just one hex on the Wretched Tropics map. So there's a lot going on here. And I'm always frustrated at the end of a session where I'm like, we didn't get far enough. But it was a fun session. So the players just left the Death Caps, which was the section of jungle where big kind of rotting white mushrooms grew and kind of were, I described them as sort of like bloated bodies that were just decomposing, and they released these spores that made it impossible to heal. The living were not permitted. The legends that the guides and the hunters of the tropics said is that only the dead are permitted to walk in the Death Caps. And that was the warning that was sort of given to the players. But they managed to survive the Death Caps. They killed the necromancer that had taken over one of the unblinking spires there. I don't need to get into what an unblinking spire is at the moment. But they were on their way to Hopta's Roost, which is this mountain range of arching peaks. And if you were to look at the mountain range from the side, they almost sort of all overlap to look like rainbows a little bit. Not like literally like, wow, it looks like big. You can see the stripes, but more just these mountain ranges kind of curve and have almost kind of Dr. Seuss style, like really exaggerated points that when they overlap gives this illusion of rainbows. And what the players know about Hopta's Roost is it is where the elven god of Hopta had her temple. And there are many elven gods of the ancient elves who once lived in the tropics, and Hopta is known as she who paints the sky. She was the god of beauty, of love, and art. And they know there's a temple there, and one of the players is a descendant of the Sun Plume elves, the elves who originally lived here and worshipped Hopta. And she's sort of on this quest to rediscover her ancestry and learn what happened to her people. So they needed to climb Hopta's Roost. And in my notes, I'll actually show you, this is what like my session plan looked like. I tried something a little different where I kind of point, let me actually switch the view real fast so you can see more of what I'm showing you. I did this little point crawl idea of like, okay, so this is where we're going to start the session, and then there's going to be a decision. The players can either go climb the cliffs, or they can try to go use these shrines to kind of ascend the mountain with these rainbow bridges, and then there's going to be a big boss fight, and then they're going to have to decide where they're going to go from there. We didn't get that far. We did not get that far, unfortunately, but it was fun to sort of prep the session that way. And so the first decision, or the first thing that the players had to do as they were climbing up Hopta's Roost, was pass through this, it was kind of like this ledge in the mountain where the cliff came down. There's kind of this flat buttress of rock, and then the cliff continued, and it kind of wound its way up around this mountain at the base of the peaks. And there were all these statues that they saw, but they were not really detailed statues. They were more like, I described it as sort of like bonsai trees, that effect, where someone had taken decades and decades to grow the nature around here up in such a way that it would hold pieces of wood and rocks and like fruit seeds and pods in such a way to kind of create the illusion of a humanoid, of some sort of mortal. So there were, and you could also think of it as like mannequins. Like it clearly looks like a person, but there's no features to them. And there were dozens and dozens of them built up along this path that would lead them up into Hopta's roost. And if anyone were to look at one, or even in their peripheral, they would start to see details form within these statues. And eventually it would look just like someone that this person had lost, someone they loved that either had passed away or that had disappeared from their life or something like that. And if you looked and saw this person, if you let your heart chase after something that you had already lost, something beautiful that was no longer here, then the magics that had been placed here by Hopta's priest to kind of safeguard the temple from those they deemed unworthy, like these statues would become incredibly lifelike, and they would open their arms up to sort of beckon that person to them, to embrace them in a hug. And if you failed to save and began walking towards these statues, what would actually happen is you wouldn't even be walking towards a statue. You would just walk off the edge of the cliff, and your heart would lure you to your doom, essentially. It was a cool little trap that I'd set for them, sort of an environmental puzzle or trap, that they ended up passing their saves. There really wasn't ever a moment where we were like, oh, I think someone might actually die. I mean, I guess they sort of got close. What ended up happening, and what I didn't love, is it was the classic trap mechanic where, okay, there's a save to see if you trigger the trap. Like, did you look away quick enough, or did you look into the statue's eyes and now you're being enthralled by it? Okay, you failed that one. Now you're walking towards it. Now I need you to make another save to avoid going over the edge of the cliff. And I'm like torn, because I'm like, I don't know if that's too generous, or it's like really giving the players a lot of chance to avoid some serious damage. Or is that fair? Do you need at least 2 attempts? I don't know. I just felt like the players, while they thought it was interesting and definitely were a little worried about these statues, I never got the sense that they were like, oh my God, like, don't look at them. Do not look at them. We have to like come up with a plan. We need to wear blindfolds, and we need to just walk this up and find a way to guide ourselves without relying on our sight at all. Otherwise, we're going to walk off the cliff to our death, right? That's what I want out of my games. I want players to be like really stressed. I want them to be so immersed in the world and so certain that death could really be around any corner that they take precautions and they form plans. And what I find more often happens is players kind of just wing it. They're like, oh, we'll be fine. Like, we'll come up with something in the moment. And I'm not sure how to fix that. So if you have ideas on that, let me know in the comments. Anyways, the players pass through this garden of statues. They pass Hopta's first test, and that's when they reach their second decision point. And that was, you've got 2 routes to reach the top of Hopta's roost, where they know the temple is at. You can either take the most direct, quickest, but potentially deadly route, which is climb a series of cliffs that you can see. There are these big nests on them where these weird birds with these beautiful sparkling feathers are kind of swooping all around. And the players had even seen at the Unblinking Spire, they'd seen a vision of these birds kind of snatching like a backpack off of a different adventurer who was trying to climb these cliffs, stole the pack, and then another one knocked him off the cliff and he fell to his death. So they know that those birds are dangerous, but it would be the most direct route. Or they could follow a series of paths that would lead them to what looked like a shrine to Hopta, and they could see this path sort of wound up across the mountains. But what I noted to them, what they saw, is the closest one, the trail would lead up to the shrine, but it was just at like the peak of a lower mountain, or at the edge of a cliff. The trail didn't continue. It just reached the end, but then they could see another shrine atop a nearby mountain that was within eyesight. So it was kind of implied like there's going to be some sort of puzzles or something you have to do to connect these shrines. But that is clearly the safer path. It was laid with fossilized feathers and beautiful lizard scales and dinosaur scales and things like that the worshippers of Hopta had brought and laid down to mark this sacred trail. And the players decided to take the more dangerous one. I don't really know why. I don't remember why they made that decision. I was fine with either. And the shrines would have been cool. Like one of them was going to be, since Hopta is she who paints the sky, there was going to be a small shrine. And inside there would be these kind of a lot of big, reflective, sparkling dinosaur scales and feathers on sort of like swiveled harnesses. And all of them were painting a picture, like light was coming in and reflecting off of them and hitting the ground and creating some sort of image. I'm not exactly sure what. I would have just came up with it in the moment. And the puzzle was pretty simple. What they needed to do was turn these in such a way that the light actually reflected up to the top of the shrine where there was a faint kind of mosaic sky. And they would paint the sky with this same image, and that would cause a literal rainbow to arch across the gap between this shrine and the next, and that would be the continuation of the path. And there would be several of these little shrines where they needed to basically do art projects as puzzles to continue on, but there would always be a timer. That would be the hazard there. If they took too long on the safe path, if they kind of just meandered around and didn't take it that seriously, then some big monster would come and attack them. What it probably would have been is like whatever I was going to have this be, some sort of like parrot wyvern, because one of the symbols of Hopta is the parrot, one of the most beautiful birds. And so this would have just been some monstrosity. What would have once been a beautiful creature that maybe Hopta even hatched is now this freakish thing that would have tried to terrorize them. And it would have been really, really deadly. There wouldn't have been a lot of threats along the path except for this one. But they didn't do that. They tried to climb the cliffs. And so they had some cool fights with the steel beaks, which are not S-T-E-E-L, like a hard axe steel, but S-T-E-A-L, steel beaks, because they steal things. And basically, they just had a mechanic with Daggerheart where if they hit with a talon attack, as a reaction, they could mark a stress to then force the player who got hit to make a save, an agility save. And if they failed, then the steel beak stole a random piece of gear, and it could be anything. Like nothing was off limits, basically, except armor. Which even then, I might have been like, it could steal an armor slot. It doesn't take your whole suit of armor, but it reduces its effectiveness down by 1 because of the suit of chainmail you're wearing. Suddenly, a pauldron and some of the armor is ripped off by this thing, and you still have most of your armor, but you're losing a little bit of it. That's what I really like about the Daggerheart mechanics, is you can get pretty granular with it narratively, if that makes sense. It's cool. But anyways, the players had to climb this series of cliffs. And if they failed, there was, of course, the risk of falling, but I also could use fear to have a few of these steel beaks swoop in and have an attack and try and steal some stuff. And we had a really, really fun encounter, or a fight with like 4 of these things where one of the players almost had their like, or it was Amanita, the Qatari elf, an ancient descendant of the Sun Plume Elves, almost had her like ancestral magic stone, like what she uses to commune with her spirits and cast her magic, was almost stolen. It was snatched off her neck, but then she used one of her magic items to turn into a saber-tooth, leapt off of the cliff, and pounced down on this steel beak as it was trying to fly away, buried her fangs into its neck, did a killing blow. I think she crit, which was awesome. And then kind of it crashed down into the cliff where she was able to hold on and avoid a fall. And it was a really fun fight with some really cool moments. But what I was really upset about at the end of the session, what I was kicking myself for, is I had 3 series of checks to climb this mountain. And then this fight, and what in my head was meant to only be like maybe 30 minutes of the session ended up being more than half of the session. And it's weird because like in the moment, it didn't feel like it was taking that long, but it did. And I don't really know what I did wrong or how to correct that. The only thing I could think of when I was sort of reflecting on the session afterwards was I didn't need to have 3 checks. It could have just been 1. But then I also am like, would that have made this whole ordeal of ascending a mountain feel way too quick? Like just a kind of a hand wavy, like, okay, and then you climb the mountain. I'm not sure. If you have ideas on how you handle that sort of thing, let me know in the comments, because I'm struggling to figure it out. I don't want it to be too quick, but I don't want it to be so long. And maybe the fight was a big part of that, but the fight seemed like it went pretty quick, because I even had a few of the Steelbeaks flee if they got too low on stress or HP. It wasn't like these things are going to fight to the death. So I don't know. But then the players reach the top of the mountains. They reach Hopta's temple, where they see that there are these like floating artist workshops. They're primitive in their design. They're not like medieval or like Renaissance workshops. They're like in these big nests that are floating just a few inches above the air, and they're kind of made from stucco and have lots of dinosaur bones and big feathers used for like the roofs and things like that. But they're floating just a little bit off the ground, and the mosaic tile path leads up to the temple of Hopta, which is in a even larger nest floating on the above the ground. And these steps, which are these arching rainbows that you ascend, lead up to the temple, which looks like a huge parrot's head, kind of turned to the side, its beak open to the sky. And the sun was sort of setting behind the temple, framed within the beak of this big parrot temple. It was really, really cool. And everything was beautiful. Like nothing looked like it was in ruins, which should have been the first clue to the players. Like, hey, you heard that these were the ruins of a long forgotten elven god, but they look like they're in use. They look pristine. And I don't think they quite picked up on that. But what did happen is the gnome of the party, Nibs, who's sort of an artificer and inventor kind of a deal, he said, like, I want to investigate this technology because that's the lens through which mortals who worship Vecna sort of see this stuff. A lot of it is the divine science. He's like, how is this thing floating? And he went to kind of run his hand under the workshop, and I didn't even have him roll. I just was like, yep, this is going to clearly give you a glimpse into the illusion. What he saw was actually, they weren't even floating. These workshops had crashed down into the earth and were partially melted and broken open and were rotting. And at the back of one of them, he saw he saw what looked like elves, but that had started to take on these bird-like features. Their faces had kind of split and beaks were coming out of them, and their gowns and arms were sort of blending into this matted feathered cloak of sorts and wings. And they were manically scribbling on stone tablets or in ancient canvases made from animal hides pulled across bone. They were like sketching the characters as they saw them, and looked completely crazed. And then the illusion kind of returned. And I described it, it was as if something suddenly with a stroke of an invisible brush painted back the illusion. And the players were like, oh, something's going on. And then they heard a voice, and it was the voice of Petra, the high priestess of this temple, who appeared beautiful as any elf would. And she spoke to Amanita and said, you have come to this temple where, though our God, I'm going to kind of summarize this quickly because I'm realizing I'm spending a lot of time on this session recap. It's not even the point of this sermon. But hey, like I said, this is a channel where you get to listen to someone ramble about cool world building stuff. Anyways, Patra spoke to Amanita and said, you have come to this place where, though our goddess is lost to us, her beauty can live on forever. Our kingdom is no more, but you can stay here with me, and we will make beautiful things for the rest of our days. And won't you come with me into this temple, and I will tell you what has happened to our goddess. And she even pointed to the other characters who are followers of Vecna and said, I can tell you what they have done to our people. Come with me. And Amanita spoke with the party for a moment, and they were all on the same page of like, okay, clearly if something goes wrong, which it probably will, like, here's the signal, but we'll wait out here. And yes, you go speak with this high priestess. And Amanita entered the temple where, with some magic, she kind of caused the ceiling to paint this, like a big canvas. She painted out these scenes, which depicted Facepalker, the ancient black dragon, was the first to arrive in the tropics. And with his sulfuric acid presence and breath, he basically melted most of the Sun Plume's kingdoms and civilizations away. And then when they were in their weakened state, Vecna showed up and the Inquisition showed up, and they stole the souls of the Sun Plume's gods and used them to power the great city of Featherwharf and these great machines that were pulling things up from the earth and sending them into the heavens with this giant tractor beam to aid in the construction of the Ark. And then Patra basically gave Amanita sort of an ultimatum of like, you can stay here with me and be a chosen worshiper of Hopta and be beautiful for the rest of your days, or you can go with these thieves and you will be an enemy of Hopta. And at that same time, outside the temple, flocks of these crazed elven birds, these cursed elves, were beginning to make their way up towards the martyrs, who one of them used this scroll of a prayer scroll of necromancy to bring up a couple zombies, and they had this cool like Avengers Assemble moment where they were getting ready for the fight. And then Hopta chose like, it's not Hopta, Amanita made the decision that I figured she would, and I believe it was the decision I was hoping she would make, and the one I knew she would, which was, I know that my friends out there, who they serve, they may have done things in the past that were evil, and I don't understand that. but I don't believe that the people I'm with are evil, and I'm going to follow them. My heart is with them, and I still worship Hopta, but my heart is with them right now. And that's when Patra revealed that she was actually she's been corrupted by a demon, and that she is Patra, she whose beauty shall never end. And she turned into this giant. It's clearly a Zinchian demon from 40k. I just used that as the art, but this big mutant parrot demon creature whose staff had this like I described it as if someone had taken a rainbow and compressed and trapped it within the sphere of energy at the end of her staff. And she was then Amanita could see that this staff was siphoning beauty away from all of the elves that still lived here, and that's what was turning them into these monstrous bird creatures. And then she realized, oh, yep, there's going to be a huge fight here. Hopta's temple fell long ago, and this is heresy in its purest form. A demon has corrupted the high priestess, who is now stealing greedily beautiful things. And that's where the session ended. So next week, well, this upcoming Wednesday, we'll start our session with a big fight against that demon. And I'm just going to stop there because holy cow, that took way too long to recap. Sorry about that, but I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe there's some cool ideas there for you. And if you're interested in joining the campaign, I've got 2 open seats. You can find it on Start Playing if you're at all interested in playing some Daggerheart with me and joining this campaign. Okay, what else did we have to talk about? What else? 2 quick other things. One was, this is a really quick one. I watched the sickest video essay. I need to go back to my Google view, actually. A superhero for us right now, an analysis of Absolute Batman, The Zoo. I've never read the Absolute Batman series. I'm not even a big comic book reader. In college, I read a little bit of Spider-Man and had fun collecting them. But I've sort of been feeling that itch more recently, like, comic books would be fun. And then I watched this video about Absolute Batman, and holy cow, it was so good. First of all, it's over 3 hours long, so perfect video essay to just throw on while you're painting. But also, when I was watching it, what's so cool about it is it had me feeling the same way towards Batman now at 30 years old that I felt towards Spider-Man when I was like 7, where I was just like, this is what heroes are all about. Like, this guy is fucking awesome, and I want to be like this guy. And it was just such a cool feeling that I hadn't had in a long time about superheroes or towards a superhero. Because like I definitely am in that. I checked out from Marvel a long time ago. I just haven't watched the movies. I don't hate on anyone who does, but I just think that they're pretty blah. And DC doesn't really do much for me. The new Superman movie was pretty cool, actually. It kind of got close to that sort of hope core. Yeah, this is like what a hero should be, and like do the right thing because it's the right thing. That's how I felt towards Batman. So I'm not gonna even try and like get into any of the analysis that C.W. Tucker did because it's just amazing. But go watch that video, and I think you'll love it. And it was just cool. Like, it's a part of the hobby. It's a part of my hobby life that is the embers are maybe beginning to warm, and it might become a roaring fire as I get back into comic book collecting. And my last thing that I did over the past week was I made 2 reference folders. I made one for painting inspiration, where I just started printing out cool artwork. So this is like some of that John Blanche art where the Blanchitsu style sort of comes from. I have some for some Space Marines. I have some for like some Zinchian cool demons, just some like other artwork that's not so like character focused. And I'm just going to start filling this with artwork. Right now it's all John Blanche because that's just what I was the most interested in and what I'm referencing for the minis I have right now. But I'll also start filling this with printed artwork from some of my favorite painters, like Totally Not Panicking, and probably some cool like miscast stuff. And then I did the same thing for terrain, and I made a terrain inspiration binder with just some cool crafted builds. In my mind, I'm like, ooh, a cool, like that's clearly a satellite dish for a 40k sci-fi game, but in my setting, which is sort of pulpy science fantasy, I'm like, maybe Vecna has built, like all over the world, there are these prayer shrines that kind of look like big praying hands, or like, I don't know, like big open hands with the Eye of Vecna at the center of them. And what they do is they detect when a mortal is praying to Vecna nearby, and they take what's being said and they transmit it to the Raptured City where Vecna resides as a way to basically spy on the people. They're like scrying dishes, as opposed to like people believe when they pray that when their words are sent to the raptured city, it's Vecna answering their prayers. And maybe there's some truth to that, but mostly I like the idea that he's using those to spy on all of his mortal followers all over the world. Anyways, that's like maybe a terrain build I'll do at some point. But then I just added a bunch of like little printouts of cool stuff. Like these are some cool terrain boards that I thought looked really awesome that I wouldn't mind trying to do someday. And the reason I did this is because I was getting really sick of going on Pinterest or Instagram when I sat down to paint or craft or kit bash something and scrolling endlessly in search of like the perfect piece of inspiration. That can be the problem with the internet, abundance. It is endless. You will never stop finding new sources of inspiration on the internet, which is so cool. But when it comes to art, it can be a real hindrance because you will end up seeking more than you are actually creating. You will always be looking for that perfect reference image, that perfect thing to spark the project in your mind, rather than just sitting down and working with what you got. And that's what I like about these binders. These are now what I've got. So if I want more inspiration, then I can take time to go online and find really cool stuff and print it out and have a physical medium, a physical source of inspiration. But other than that, like, I just have to sit down and start working. I won't let myself scroll endlessly anymore because that's very passive in the hobby, and I want to be more active. So that was the last thing I did as part of my hobby offerings this week. So hopefully those give you some cool ideas to how to maybe do some work in your hobby. Maybe you want to do this. Go make a terrain binder. Go make a painting binder or a drawing binder or whatever your hobby is. Go make a binder of physical reference media and use that as opposed to the internet to get your inspiration. Okay, let's move on to the main sermon topic, Homebrew 40K factions. So I think the title of the video is like, I'm homebrewing 40K factions I can't actually play. And that's the point. What I mean by that is I come from a very RPG heavy background. I've played lots of 40K. I've played in a few like local tournaments and stuff and enjoyed it. But really I come from RPG narrative storytelling backgrounds. And so what I find happens a lot is when I go to the table to play 40K, I want to tell a fun story. I want to think about when I roll and my squad of Marines either completely whiffs or they roll hot and they wipe a squad or they only do one wound. Like I don't want to just take the dice rolls at face value. I want to figure out, why did that happen? Did I have this awesome bolter porn scene where I'm just mowing down a wave of chaos cultists as they're running towards the craters that my Marines have bunkered down in? Or is it the sort of thing where I whiffed because as we have the shot lined up, suddenly artillery starts bombarding us in these craters and the shots just go wild and we have to take cover? Like, that's fun to me. But what happens at most of the tables is everybody just roll. All right, I rolled. Oh, yep, scoop up the hits, roll the wounds. Okay, you got to make 5 saves. Okay, pull 2 models. All right, next. And it's like, that's lame. That is so boring to me. Like, you're just doing math at the table as opposed to doing really cool storytelling. And so I've found myself over the years kind of just receding further and further away from the actual playing of 40K and into just the kit bashing, world building, the lore and the setting is really fun. Let's just live in it in my head. And that was part of this exercise. I was having a conversation. Actually, no, what it was is I had sent a question into the Hive Scum podcast for their questions from the Hive segment and said, hey, if you could add any new faction to 40K, what would you add? And to be honest, I didn't really get a great answer from them. I kind of thought they were like, well, I don't know. I think it's pretty solid. I think it's really cool. And I'm like, guys, come on. Give me something to work with here. But I appreciate them just like taking my question and at least giving it a shot. But I was not satisfied. And so I sat down and decided to come up with my own list of cool ideas for some factions to add to the 40K universe. And we're going to jump into that right now. So somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist... Actually, you know what? Is it better to do this view? Whoops. No, that's the other thing. Never mind. Somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist Ulethrals, a newly encountered species of squid-like Xenos whose psychic talents are such that a small number of Ulethral elder minds is all it takes to telepathically power and pilot an entire fleet of mechanical war machines. So what I envision is a Xeno species that almost has like the Madoc vibe from Marvel, like a big floating thing, or like a big squid-like head with weird tentacles hanging down beneath it that is in some sort of floating mechanical harness device that kind of floats it around the battlefield and has some of its weapon systems. I don't imagine the Ulathrall itself is like a very potent fighter. It's not very powerful. In fact, it's probably very vulnerable, and that's why it needs this contraption to wear like armor. But then what they do is the army itself, if I were to imagine it on the battlefield, if you were to release a miniature line for it, you'd have maybe 3 to 5 Ulathralls proper on the battlefield, and they would be like your HQs and your elites. The rest of the army would be, I'm not quite sure what they would look like yet, but I'd imagine they're like they're just empty shells. Oh, I like that word shells, because squid, as I was thinking of this army, I was imagining sort of leaning into some sort of ocean theme or like deep sea fish kind of visual aesthetic. They have these shells of warriors and war machines that their psychic mind is powerful enough to power them all, animate them, and pilot them. And so these HQs, these Ulathralls, are in the back line. They're on the far end of the battlefield, piloting and sending their armies forward in a not hive mind, because I don't want it to be too similar to Tyranids, but they are telepathically and telekinetically working together to control this small army. And maybe these machines and these robot warriors have like an angler fish look to them, or like a goblin shark look to them, something weird and creepy. Or maybe a lot of it is kind of like floating squid, like jellyfish like things. I don't know, but I just like this visual idea I have so far of these squid-like Ulathrall, and these Elder Mind titles are clearly inspired by like the Elder Brain and Mind Flayers from D&D. But I thought that would be a really cool army, or a Xenos species. Is a very small amount of the army itself is actually organic life. The rest are robots being controlled by the organic life. I realize that also gets kind of into the like Necron vibe of like these robot shells that are sort of being not piloted in the same way, but controlled. And it also has a little bit of Tyranid there of like a hive mind kind of controlling things. And that's why I think the visual, like what they look like, needs to be super unique so that they aren't just mistaken or kind of like blend into the background. And one quick note I'll make on coming up with these Xeno species for 40K. What I quickly discovered is, wow, 40K has like such a broad and yet specific visual tone and imagery to it that it was hard to imagine a Xenos alien species that didn't feel like it belonged more in like Star Trek or Star Wars. Something that was like really sleek and slimy, not slimy, I don't know. Or like Avatar, like it just was like from the world of Pandora. It was hard to conceptualize an alien creature that felt like it belonged in the 40K universe, which was weird. It kind of seemed paradoxical to me because of how big the universe is. But it took a while to kind of get comfortable in the setting. But let's move on. Idea number 2 for a homebrew faction. Somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist the Order of the Founding Faith, an Adeptus Sororitas order tasked with cleansing not yet inhabited planets of hostile Xenos and safeguarding the construction of cathedrals and shrines from which future imperial settlers can settle and expand their cities. So the idea here is you have these planets all across the universe, or all across the 40K universe, that have been noted by the Imperium as like, we want to settle there at some point, but that might not be for another 1,000 years. So what the Sororitas do is they're sent there, they wipe out any hostile Xenos, which in my mind isn't like, it's not grand warfare, but like more like, are there hostile, almost like wild Xenos? Like, go kill the hostile predators, and if there's a little bit of intelligent life there, like, yeah, get rid of them too. But it's not, they're more like going and hunting as opposed to like waging full warfare on this planet. But anyways, once they've gotten the planet to a somewhat safe state, and a state where like those Xenos will never fully recover and repopulate it by the time the humans arrive, then they protect the Mechanicum or whoever is sent to build up these cathedrals, and then they leave. And what I love about it is you have this dead, empty, uninhabited world, and the only sign or evidence of civilization on it is this huge temple to the emperor. That if like some other xeno species or some other, you know, group of humans that have not yet been rediscovered by the Imperium, if they were to arrive on this planet, they would find this cathedral and be like, "What? Where did this come from? Who lived here? Like, there's no sign of civilization except for this temple. This is bizarre." I feel like it also gave 2000, what is it, 2001 A Space Odyssey or something, where there's that monolith at the beginning that the apes are all like looking up at, or the cavemen or whatever, like, "What, this is so crazy." I wanted it to have that vibe to it, where if the planet never became inhabited, the imperial settlers never showed up, then you have this freaky weird temple to a god that no one even knows who they are, sort of a vibe. But if the settlers do show up, then it's like the emperor is there waiting with open arms to as a shining beacon from which they can expand their city or their settlement. I thought that sounded really, really cool. So that's the order of the founding faith. Next, somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist. This is might be my favorite. The Bad Thoughts, spelled Badthotz. Bad Thoughts. An orc clan that uses enslaved imperial psychers as living weapons and a sacred food source for the clan's unusually high number of weird boy warp heads. The spores released by warp heads are a uniquely potent hallucinogen to non-orc psychers. So it is a tribe or a clan of orcs who have managed to, they've built their orky tech that allows them to capture and imprison and hold a high number of psychers. I noted that they were imperial psychers, but I imagine they could be psychers from lots of other like weird xeno species. But I imagine they have them on like big man catcher collars with these long poles, kind of forcing them forward to the front lines of their battles and torturing them in such a way that it forces them to do their psychic abilities, forcing them to use their gifts against the Imperium that they once served. And then if a psyker proves too difficult to manage, or they're killed in battle, or have just reached the end of their life, then they are prepared as a sacred dish for the orc weird boys or warp heads, which was a new bit of orc lore I hadn't known about, which is a weird boy that lives long enough and uses their psychic gifts enough can become a warp head, and they have a little bit more control over it and are a little bit more powerful. And so this specific clan has a lot of them, and like kind of makes up the bulk of the leadership of this clan. And these dishes that are prepared, I imagine it's literally just they bring these guys the psychers and they just eat them alive. It's not like they've actually cooked them, they just devour them, because it makes them more psychically powerful. By consuming the brains and the flesh of other psychers, these mad boys believe, and hence because they're orcs, it actually becomes true, they become even more powerful. And then I just thought, because orcs in 40K reproduce through spores that they release, I found out like they release it all throughout their life, but when they die, they like release a big cloud of them or whatever, that the fungus that grows up from the spores of these weird boys and the mad boys, and even like the normal orcs of this clan, because I imagine all of the orcs of this clan are somewhat psychically gifted, they release additional spores that are psychic dampeners. So any battle that the Imperium was fighting against these orcs, if they were too close to the spores, they'd find that their librarians and their psychers and their astropaths would have a really hard time using their abilities, and it could even prove like deadly to them. Like, I know that part of the weird boys and mad boys lore is like there's always the risk of their head just exploding. Maybe that's what can happen to an Imperial librarian in the vicinity of these spores. I thought that would be cool. And that's a good example of an army that you could run it in 40K, right? You could build out a list that has as many weird boys as you can get, but it wouldn't be even close to what I imagine the lore of the Bad Thoughts being. I would want even the base unit of orc boys to have some sort of psychic power that they could use. And I guess I could just like narratively have fun with it at the table. Like, oh, if I whiffed, it's because, or if I like rolled really, really hot on their shooters, then I also, in my headcanon, it's because they're also like one of them belched some fire or did like a weird psychic attack. I don't know. Like, you could do that, but it's not what I want. I want more flexibility in Warhammer list building for 40K. I want to be able to build my own factions. That's what I really want from 40K. I want a way to build whatever I want and be able to kit bash whatever I want and use it at the table, even if that means creating an entirely new faction. I doubt that's even possible, but whatever. That's what I want. Moving on from the bad thoughts. Somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist Hive Fleet Azathoth, named after the Cthulhian god of insanity and panic and like fear, I believe. So this is a Tyranid fleet that releases enormous clouds of signal dampening hush spores that jam Vox communications, reduce auspex and infrared visibility, and most importantly, induce extreme paranoia in biological life forms. The inspiration behind this Tyranid Hive fleet was the movie The Mist. I think it's The Mist or The Fog. I think M. Night Shyamalan did it. It's like this fog rolls in over a coastal town, and living within the fog, it's like a portal to another plane where there are weird, freaky monsters, and some of them are like huge and massive. And the movies, a lot of it is about like the people caught in the fog just kind of going crazy and with fear. I wanted that to be what happened with these Tyranids more than it already does for Tyranids. And so the spores that they release are almost on like a microscopic level. Like, yes, they have a lot of the big floating spores and like the spore mines and things that Tyranids have, but these are even smaller. They're so small and there's so many of them. They literally create fogs that can, or clouds, I called them, like huge clouds that can cover continents if they produce enough of them fast enough. And what I noted as well about this Hive fleet is that infected Imperial worlds often destroy or cripple themselves in a crazed panic long before the entire Hive fleet Azathoth can even make planetfall. So Azathoth shows up, it begins to release these spores, it's dropping some of its like Tyranid invasion fleet, which is hiding within the spores, kind of playing into the Mist movie reference of these Tyranids you never really see them. They're always just kind of shadows in this giant fog that has fallen upon this planet. And the Imperial Guard or whoever is stationed here, they can go into such a crazed, fear-driven panic and become so paranoid that infrastructure just begins to collapse. And it can plague... actually, no, I was about to say something from a different idea. But yeah, you can just have basically like ghost worlds, I imagine. Like people say that when Azathoth shows up, the Hive fleet touches down, that when like if Space Marines are dropped down to try and save the planet, they arrive and find like there's no Tyranids here, and there's also nobody here except a bunch of dead people because they've all killed each other, or they've gone so crazed with fear that they've starved, or they've locked themselves away in bunkers and never came back out, and it's just this like abandoned world that the Tyranids can then easily consume with very little resistance. I thought that sounded pretty cool. So that's my unique Hive fleet for the Tyranids, Hive fleet Azathoth. Next, somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist Thizgrips, a rare xenospecies. So this is another one of my brand new ideas, but a rare xenospecies that consumes plasma energy in their larva stage to fuel a rapid metamorphosis into enormous plasma-spitting Mothmen. Their cocoons are most commonly found infesting void ship engine rooms and Hive City reactors. So this is an example of a species, or this is like a faction in 40K where I don't want an army. It doesn't make sense for the Thizgrips or the Mothmen to have an army, an organized army that you could put on the table, and it would make sense that they're having like true war against the Space Marines or whatever. But from a lore perspective, it's a really cool species to do like a little, almost like a kill team style mission where like you're sending your Imperial Guard in, or you're sending in a small squad of Space Marines to clear a ship of these Thizgrips. I don't really know what they look like. They don't literally look like the Mothmen, like the myth of the Mothmen in our world. But I do imagine they have sort of like moth-like wings and maybe like big weird eyes or antennas. Maybe they have like fibrous fur, kind of like a moth. But I imagine their when I said that they can spit or they breathe plasma, I imagine it almost comes from like their face kind of like unfurls, and out of like weird eyes or some sort of mouth, they're shooting streams of plasma. Or maybe they can, like a silkworm, like a silk moth, they can make webs of plasma radiating silk. I don't know. I don't exactly know what their abilities would be, but I just like the idea of weird, freaky alien moths flapping around in the inner workings of an Imperial void ship or a Space Hulk or a Lost Hive City, and they're up in the rafters flapping around, drooling plasma. It's very like Godzilla, sort of the new Godzilla lore with the kaiju, where they absorb radiation and it makes them more powerful, makes them bigger, and sort of like a Mothra vibe to it as well, of these weird big alien grubs or caterpillars that will find their way into a reactor room. Maybe they're really small at first, like small being a relative term, but maybe they're like this big, and they can move through the ducts and the inner workings of a void ship till they get to the reactor room. They make their cocoon, and very quickly absorbing this plasma energy, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually they're in their adult form, and then they're moving around terrorizing the ship. So that's the Fizz Grip. I that was an alien species. That was like the furthest I could start to kind of push my mind that it still felt like it belonged in the setting of like a weird big moth creature. I'm like, does that feel right for 40K? And I think the idea of it spitting or breathing or shooting plasma kind of helped with it. I don't know. Idea number 6. Somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist the Serahur Union, CERE-HUJR, Serahur Union, a Votan League secretly experimenting with captured Tyranid synapse organisms in an effort to study the hive mind and utilize it to restore their ancestor core's rapidly deteriorating machine intelligence. So if you don't know what Votan are, which means you probably don't know what any of these things are because you're not familiar with 40K, but Votan are like space dwarves, and they worship the Votan, which are these giant, essentially AIs, these huge supercomputers that have been around for so long. Oh, and the computers often look like big dwarven faces, which is cool. But the computers have been around for so long, and they've taken in so much information that the GPU is basically burning out. And they're becoming crazed, or they operate so slowly that you don't hear from them for like hundreds or thousands of years. So the Votan they worship these AIs as gods, or these artificial intelligence as gods. And maybe this was the one faction that when I was coming up with it, I'm like, this could maybe already exist in the lore. I'm not sure. But the name of this Votan League, Sarah, coming from Sarah, cerebral, Sarah, what's the name for the brain? Cerebrum? That doesn't sound right. Cerebrium? Maybe that's what it is. But anyways, CERE comes from sort of the brain thing. And then Hur, HUJR, I think that's how you say that. I just looked up like, what is brain? What is the word for brain in Nordic? I think, because a lot of the names I was reading from the Leagues of Votan sounded sort of like Viking-ish, kind of. And so I just smashed those two together. Sarah Hur and brain, clearly playing into what these space dwarves are doing in secret. They are trying to take the hive mind and inject it into their Votan in some shape or form. I don't think that means literally like biologically, but more like studying how the hive mind works and trying to like create their own version of this kind of network of minds, so that the Votan itself can share the load of all the data it's collected with other minds. Maybe that's what all the individual members of this league, like they're all trying to connect their brain to the Votan so that they can share that burden and give some of that life back to the Votan. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. And I do like the idea that in these experiments, maybe it's showing promise. Maybe there's been some successes and the Votan is getting a bit of its sanity back, and it's operating a bit quicker. But at the same time, that hive mind, that Tyranid instinct is beginning to influence the thoughts of this league, and they're becoming hostile towards other Votan leagues, or maybe are even becoming like they're an ally to the hive mind. Unknowingly, the hive mind is puppeting this League of Votan to now help other hive fleets or other Tyranid organisms in the area achieve their goals. By maybe a Tyranid hive fleet is being attacked or being warded off by an Imperial Guard regiment, and the hive mind kind of influences the Leagues of Votan to somehow also come into conflict with those Imperial Guard regiments, so that the Tyranids can consume both of them. I think that would be cool, and play into this like battle of wits and minds that is happening between the Leagues and the Tyranids. That's idea number 6. Two more. Idea number 7. Somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist the Choir Pit, a Slanesh worshipping cult whose members distribute corrupting chants, dirges, and hymns across imperial battle trenches, which plague the dug-in regiments with mass suicides, friendly fire, and insubordination. The cult membership, too, I imagined, is often imperial officers or like ranking officials who are desperate to raise morale. That's always my big question when it comes to a cult is how does the cult bring in new members in such a way that it isn't obvious they're a cult, right? It has to be something that the members would want and believe in without really having any of their alarm bells ringing. And so this one is the cult exists in the trenches of the battlefields that exist everywhere in the 41st millennium, and the dirges, the chants, the hymns that they spread, the prayers to the emperor, it's all spread through the message of this idea, this promise to the officers, whoever, like, this is the only way to raise morale. If we don't do something to raise morale, we're going to lose the battle. So we need to be desperate. And sure, some of the prayers that we're spreading to the emperor, like, there's a couple lines in there that are a little questionable. They might, it's kind of a little weird, but like, we need to be able to look past that in this moment to raise morale. And yeah, some of the songs that the men are singing really seem to like idolize the ecstasy of throwing yourself into battle and the feelings that come from an agonizing death. Like, that's a little weird, but hey, if it gets the soldiers ready to fight, like, all the better, right? So these officers join the cult unknowingly and then distribute this material to their members or to their soldiers, who then just devolve into Slaneshian excess of death and hopelessness in the most poetic way, I suppose, if that makes sense. Like, I just liked that the idea of a regiment that is already on the cusp of defeat and giving in is then reciting and looking to things for hope that only reinforce that problem and throw them into it even more rapidly until the battle line is just overthrown within a few days of this stuff being distributed. And maybe that's what kind of helps the cult not be discovered, is the materials that they spread, the scripture, this chaos tainted scripture. There's no one alive after a few weeks even to spread it anymore, because they're all just overtaken. The battle line is lost. So reports of this cult can never really make it up to a higher command because they just fall too quickly, which is what the Choir Pit wants. And my last idea, let's move on to the last one. Idea number 8, somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there might exist I wish I had looked up how to say this. Hecate's Wraiths. It's not Hecate, it's Hecate's Wraiths. An Imperial Guard regiment that, as part of their fortifying rituals, bury a small number of rookie regiments in explosive silos or bunkers beneath key battlefield positions to later deploy as either surprise reinforcements that come bursting up out of the ground, like zombies or wraiths, right? Or they can be used as nuclear retaliation in the face of overwhelming defeat. So you've got Hecate's Wraiths deployed on a planet. Maybe they're fighting Tyranids. If the battle is looking like it can be won, they just need to deploy some extra firepower. Then they sort of like lure the Tyranids into this trap, and then up from the earth, as the explosive roofs of these bunkers are shot off, outpour these reinforcements that then kind of catch the Tyranids or the orcs or whoever between these two forces. That's like the ideal deployment and how the Hecate's Wraiths fight. But if the Tyranids just prove too overwhelming and the back line, like the main force of the army, kind of they lure too much in, or they get overwhelmed and there's no way they're going to be able to actually do that pincer maneuver, then as everybody else is being pulled out, those bunkers with these rookie Marines or rookie troops in them are detonated as nuclear bombs, and as a way to just like, hey, if we're going to go down, we're going to take as many of them with us as we can. And so the name Hecate's Wraiths, the meaning kind of behind that is, one, like those who survive their first initiation burial, the troops who actually are deployed instead of just being blown up, they are given the name or the title of Wraith. That's like, if you are new, you are not given the respect of holding that title or that name. You have to go through that. Maybe like I could see that really leans into the Gothic worshiping of death that exists in the 40K universe. You literally rise from the dead to continue fighting as a member of Hecate's Wraiths. Or another kind of double meaning to it is the shrieking howl of the bombs being detonated as these bunkers are sacrificially detonated. Like that shriek is also part of the why they're referred to as wraiths, the howl of the wraith as it is slain, or as it kind of explodes out upon the land to consume other life. That's sort of the double meaning of Hecate's wraiths. And those are the 8 homebrewed 40K factions that I could come up with over the past week. There were some of my favorites. I had closer to like a D20 list, but there were some on there that I wasn't in love with. I didn't feel like they were cool enough to share here in the sermon. So share your own in the comments and get weird with it. What I really want to hear more of is like original Xenos species or factions. I think it's super fun to build off of existing things in the universe. I did a lot of that in this list, but I really want to know like what else is out there. What are some weird things? And the biggest challenge I was running into, it was when it came to designing a Xenos species, is how do you do one that isn't humanoid? But like if it's not humanoid, it becomes really hard, I think, to describe what it looks like in a short amount of words. I feel like squid-like was like easy for me to do with the Ulthrals, and Mothman kind of gave a quick visual idea of what the Thizgrips might look like. But even Mothman implies that they're sort of bipedal, right? They kind of look like a person. And I'm like, how do you get away from that? It's really hard. So if you've got ideas, share them in the comments. Now, let's wrap up today's hobby sermon with 1d4 mortal species. A quick little list that I'd put together as I was trying to imagine, where do the mortal species of my world of Urchin come from? Where did the elves, the dwarves, the dragonborn, the tieflings, where did they all come from? Because I don't want it to just be they've always been here, or Vecna made them, right? So with the understanding that I'm building a science fantasy setting that has like the divine sciences and technology that has allowed humanity at one point to go out into the heavens and traverse the stars, sort of a vibe. I really wanted to lean into, hey, maybe some of these other species are from other planets, not planes of existence like how it is in normal D&D. Like I know the elves came from like a different plane with the Fae, and I actually don't know if there are other examples of other species that came from other planes of existence. But for me, they literally came from another planet. And this lore might be kind of retconning my setting a little bit, because what I've talked about up to this point was that Vecna built the Ark, the Arcane Repopulation Craft, to take everyone on the planet of Urchin and go find the new world, because this world was doomed. That's why he built the Ark. But I'm also wondering if maybe the Ark has been around longer than I'd originally thought or sort of said, and like also playing into the imagery of Noah's Ark and going out and finding pairs of 2 of all of the animals, right? Vecna went to the planets in his solar system, which I think is just going to be our solar system, but a more fantastical, fictional, science fiction version of our universe, where there are life forms on other planets, and they're not just like barren gas giants. There's like actual environments, like weird alien jungles on Neptune or something like that. Like Vecna took his Ark and went out and explored these other planets and brought back samples of these other intelligent mortal life forms he found, brought them to the Urchin with the ultimate goal of, yes, like I'm going to save all of the life forms of our solar system and take us to the new world. I guess that's not quite a retcon. It's more just kind of an expansion or like a deepening of the lore. All of the life forms weren't always on Urchin. Vecna went out and gathered them to then save them. I think that's cooler. So I've got 4 ideas so far that I've done. Living upon the Urchin are elves, an immortal and ageless species who must use sacred rituals to transfer their souls into new bodies grown from nature at the end of their lifespan. So I like that elves are immortal, but I found it hard in my games to sort of make sense of why would you have, like when a player joins a campaign as an elf, why, like they always have to be young, because like if you have a really old elf, then why like they should be like a higher level, right? If my elf's been around for 600 years, like why do they not have mastery of all forms of combat, or like they're a really powerful wizard or whatever? I don't know. It just always was a little weird to me. So elves always had to be on the younger side. So in this version, elves are immortal or ageless, not because they actually like the body they're in can live forever and it just ages very slowly. And instead, my idea is they came from a planet where they developed rituals that would allow them to grow new bodies up from the soil, like literally pull their bodies from nature. So maybe that's the planet where like the Fae is from. Like they could share that in my world. Elves and Fae can, they don't need to be separate. I can just take that from the typical lore of elves. But elves are grown; they're not reproduced like humans are, and elf's lifespan is a very like specific, almost fickle thing. I imagine playing into kind of the that side of elves that you see in movies. They're very like precise is maybe a word for it, but when an elf reaches the end of their lifespan, they haven't aged at all. They look exactly the same as they did when they like reached adulthood in their first life. And if they don't perform this ritual a very specific way, then they will die. Like elves are not immortal. And in fact, maybe they age incredibly rapidly at the end of their life. Like they look really, really, really young, then they reach adulthood quickly. They look the exact same until maybe they have like one cycle of the moon or one changing of the tides, right? When the tide goes out on this specific date, you have to perform this ritual to put your soul into a new body that is carried up with the new tide. And if you don't do that, like that's you'll die. That's how an elf will die of old age. I thought that was cool. I feel like it's not, I kind of stumbled through a way to describe that, so I haven't quite nailed the idea down. But it's what I really like about it most is that elves are ageless, but in a secret way. Like they actually can die of old age, but not a lot of people actually know that. And I even think it'd be cool if a lot of elves don't even know that they can live to be immortal anymore. Like maybe that was a sacred ritual of theirs that was stolen by the church or stolen by Vecna because they didn't want like maybe could be lots of stories. Maybe some people say Vecna stole that for himself so that only he and the members of his church could live forever. Or it might be like, no, they actually tried to take it so that they could give it to all species and mortals of all kinds could live forever. But the elves guarded it so fiercely that it was lost and great wars were fought over it, right? You're kind of hearing two different stories from two different perspectives on what happened to the elves in these immortal rituals. I don't know, but I thought it could be cool. That's the catchphrase of this channel. I thought that'd be cool. Let's go to idea number 2. So, living upon the urchin are dwarves, a long-lived species who forge pieces of their soul into gemstones, which they then wear or craft into their skin to prolong the aging process. And dwarves, I imagine, are then from a planet that has an immense gravity and also an extremely volcanic surface, and that is what's resulted in them being kind of squat-like. Their stout body build, the gravity's kind of compressed them a bit, and the surface is so volcanic and volatile and dangerous that they have to live underground. So that's the planetary lore to explain why dwarves look the way that they do and live the way that they do. And then the gemstone idea I like is, and I know that that's part of in Daggerheart, dwarves kind of work gemstones into their bodies, but I don't remember if it's what gives them their long lives. But for me, it was more inspired by Horcruxes from Voldemort, where they being dwarves and forging, right? They forge pieces of their soul into these precious metals that they then wear as like a crown, or they incorporate into jewelry as rings, or they set it into their skin. And maybe like depending on how noble or well off a dwarf is, sort of, and the way that they display their soul stones signals like their status, right? A king dwarf's gonna certainly display their soul stones in a much more fine and royal and breathtaking way than like a homeless dwarf who's like a beggar who's maybe lost their soul stone, and their life is certainly gonna be a lot shorter. And that actually is a perfect transition into some other little bits of lore for dwarves I thought about, which was, I know dwarves always have grudges, and I thought, why could that be? And maybe it's because of these soul stones. They are these precious things that lots of people would steal if they could. And so dwarves are very isolated and hold these grudges and are untrusting of outsiders because their lives can literally be stolen from them. Not quite in the same way that the elves and their rituals were taken. This is a physical representation of their life. And if it's taken from them, then they've lost those years they could have had. And so that's why they can hold these grudges for so long and why they lock themselves away in their keeps. And I also think I'm going to have dragons be from, I don't know if actually I'll have dragons be from the same planet as dwarves, but it will certainly explain why dwarves and dragons are such ancestral enemies, because dwarves have these precious stones that hold life in them. And dragons, the lore I've sort of come up with dragons so far is that they are this weird xeno species of giant space lizards that consume precious metals and materials to give them longer lives and give them more power. So a dwarven soul stone would be one of the most precious things that they could consume or keep within their hoard to then eat later. That's also lore for a dragon hoard. It's not, they collect all of this hoard the same way a bear would like collect food for hibernation. Like, yes, you might go into a dragon hoard and be like, look at all this gold. I can't believe it's just going to be here forever. But it's not going to be there forever. A dragon is slowly eating it, but they don't just eat it all at once. Dragons are so long-lived that they sort of just snack on their hoard over ages and ages and ages of time. So that's dwarves, and also a little sneak peek into dragons. Now, let's go to number 3. Living upon the urchin are gnomes, a short-lived species who age rapidly while not in motion, resulting in tirelessly dynamic lives and large family units. So the main piece of lore about gnomes I've always heard and seen is like, yep, they're always energetic, they're always moving, they're always doing something, they're always fascinated with something. But I never really, either I just missed it or I never really got why they were that way. So I wanted to have a really concrete explanation as to why gnomes would be that way. And so gnomes are from a planet, they were picked up from a planet by Vecna that was, it was so hostile towards gnomes. It was constantly presenting them with new predators or new environmental hazards that they had to overcome. And that could either mean like overcome as in you just got to keep moving, just always be on the move, always be nomadic, or it could lean into the like tinkering, inventing, problem solving sort of side of gnomes that you also see a lot of. Like they're either running from things or they're creating something to solve the problem. And on this planet, gnomes did this for so long at such an extreme degree that their bodies literally adapted to just have this metabolism that had to constantly be moving. And for whatever reason, biologically, if they stop or if they slow down, they burn themselves out. Like the metabolism doesn't stop. And so the gnomes can, if they stop moving, if they settle down somewhere, or if they suffer an injury that makes it hard for them to like keep doing things, like go out and be an adventurer or whatever, then they'll just sort of wither away very, very quickly. So a kind of a tragic, cursed life for gnomes that I thought was interesting. I thought it was cool. And finally, idea number 4, living upon the urchin are tieflings. Now this one is cool because it's actually, they're not a species, but rather they are the descendants of heretical or demon-cursed mortal bloodlines who the church, Vecna the Inquisition, has granted mercy in exchange for serving genetically inherited missions of redemption. So your great-great-great-grandfather made a pact with a demon and was a demon host, but he had a family, right? He had you, and you had sibling, or he had your great-great-grandfather, right? He had children, right? And your grandfather was probably burned at the stake as a heretic. The demon was exorcised from him, and the rest of the family, for fear of being heretics or also being corrupted, likely would have also been put to the stake. But in this instance, for whatever reason, your family managed to earn favor in the eyes of Vecna and was granted mercy. But you would need to redeem yourselves. And so the church, I need to find out how to explain this in a way that makes sense. Like, you were essentially like branded. And the way I imagine is like the church or an inquisitor went in and altered your genetics. They branded your genetic code in such a way that you would take on these demonic features. You would look like a tiefling to the extreme. And whatever mission of redemption you had to serve. Maybe you had to go seek out and slay. Maybe you had to go slay the lesser demons who served the high demon that your great 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 grandfather swore allegiance to. Right. That's the only way that you'll redeem your ancestors and the sin that they committed and that you have inherited. Or maybe you have to go recover some lost scripture, or you need to go build a whatever. It doesn't matter. It can be anything that the church assigns to your family. And over the generations, because this is an inherited thing, if you make progress in your mission, then you become less and less tiefling-like, or less and less demonic. So if you see someone who just has like little small kind of like tiefling horns, and maybe their skin is just like a slight reddish or a purplish tint, then you know like this is someone who has undergone, like this is someone whose family has committed themselves for many generations, likely many generations, to redeem themselves. And they are someone to be trusted, or they are someone to be welcomed into Vecna's mortal civilization. But if you see someone who has these huge tiefling horns and fangs, and they've got the cloven hooves, and they just look like a demon, really, then you know like either that is someone who has very recently had heresy fall upon their family and has very recently been branded heretic by the church, or they are someone who has made no effort to redeem themselves. And they have just seemed to willingly throw away that side of them, or that path of redemption they're not following. So maybe that character that you're playing is on the run from the Inquisition, right? The Inquisition knows you're not making efforts to redeem your family, and they're trying to find you to basically either say like time to shape up, or you're done, right? That's sort of a vibe. But I like that tieflings are not an actual like species, but are instead a brand that the Inquisition can place upon us, a certain family, and it will follow you. It doesn't matter how far down your ancestry you go, that genetic code has been altered by the church so that it will always appear within the newest children of that family line. And so your tiefling character has this like literally like baked in reason to be an adventurer and go out on these missions. I thought that was extra cool. Probably my favorite of these ideas. The dwarves and the tieflings I really like. The elves are cool, but they're not quite where it was so clunky in the way I feel like I described it. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. So those are the 4 mortal species I've come up with so far to explain how they came to the world of Urchin. And certainly I need to now look, okay, Dragonborn and Qatari, or like Catfolk, Goliath, Lizardfolk, all of them. Like, where did they all come from? What is their history? That'll be fun to think about over many more years to come as I continue playing D&D. And that brings me to the end of what I have prepared for you in today's hobby sermon number 5. We have talked about some hobby updates, lots of cool stuff going on. Don't forget to go make your own painting and terrain inspiration binders. Go paint some minis. Go start your own little journal to do your, that one doesn't have a lot in it because it's new. Go start your own little journal so that you can do all sorts of hobby writing. And go brainstorm some Warhammer 40k factions. Even if you are a tournament player and you're like, well, why would I waste my time thinking of something that I can't actually build and use at the table? Hey, maybe you're the problem, right? Maybe you need to open up that mind a little bit of yours, right? Open up that mind. Be willing to enjoy something purely for the narrative side of things and not because it's something that is going to give you an edge to win or lose, right? And lastly, give some thought to where the people of your world come from, because I think my hope is that when I have this more concrete and I can share it with my players, it will help them really get excited about the particular species they pick and lean into that lore and be immersed in that culture and not kind of just feel like, yeah, I'm a dragonborn and that's really different from a human, but I'm basically like, for all intents and purposes, I'm just a human. Or like every species sort of just played the same way and treated the same way because we're all kind of just stand-ins for humans. Like that's what I'm trying to avoid with my lore that I'm developing here. So share any ideas you have down in the comments. If you want to support the Church of Doom, if you want to support me and then and have me keep coming back here to ramble for who knows how long about this sort of stuff and to give you hopefully some cool ideas, then you can support me over on Patreon. There's one tier, it's $3, and that gets you access to the post where everything that I talked about today, it's there, but there's reference images and you can go back and see, just like read through it at your own pace. Or if you don't want to watch the videos, you can still go get all of the same ideas I share just in a written form for $3 a month. So that's the best way to help me keep doing what I'm doing. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for attending. And I will see you next time at Hobby Sermon number 4. We say these things. Wait, no. Hobby Sermon number 6. Wow. We say these things in your unholy names. Amen.